In the sweeping frontier of 1878 Wyoming, Miriam Montague, a gifted Boston piano instructor, arrives expecting to become a rancher's bride, only to be abruptly rejected for being too cultured. Devastated and stranded, she seems destined to return home with shattered hopes, then fate intervenes. A widowed rancher named Alexander Grayson seeks a teacher for his talented daughter, offering Miriam a new start. What follows is a riveting clash between her refined artistry and the raw demands of ranch life. Together they face underhanded land schemes, rustlers lurking in the night, and the disapproval of those who see no place for classical music in dusty cattle pastures. Curious to find out how Miriam adapts and whether she can transform a skeptical community's view of useless refinement, listen on to experience each conflict, triumph, and poignant moment as music and grit collide in ways no one expected. If Miriam's journey resonates with you, remember to subscribe to our channel. Your support ensures we continue unveiling stories that unite heart resilience and the courage to follow an uncharted path. The year was 1878, a time of transformative dreams and unforgiving frontiers, when lone stagecoaches ferried hopes across vast distances and a woman's perceived value often hinged on her ability to be useful, more than refined. Into this era arrived Miriam Montague, a piano instructor from Boston, whose excessive education would prove both her curse and her salvation in the rugged Wyoming territory. Miriam clutched a valise of modest belongings, her best dresses folded carefully, the precious sheet music she had composed in her meager free time, and a tiny portrait of her deceased parents that provided the last tangible link to her old life. When the stagecoach ground to a stop in the dusty crossroads settlement of Silver Creek, Miriam glimpsed a sparse collection of wooden buildings dwarfed by the expansive sky. She took a moment to compose herself before stepping down into the swirling dust. She was here as a prospective bride for Richard Harding, a rancher who had advertised for a woman of decent education and strong constitution. Their half-year correspondence, though limited to polite letters, had given Miriam hope that her musical background might be seen as an asset. Instead, from the moment she saw Harding's tense posture and furrowed brow, she sensed her illusions were about to disintegrate. "Miss Montague," he asked, eyes flicking to her well-worn gloves, and then to her cameo brooch. Tall and well-dressed for a frontier man, Harding immediately seemed uncomfortable. Miriam offered a slight curtsy, awkwardly aware of onlookers. "Mr. Harding, I've looked forward to our meeting." In response, he merely scrutinized her from head to toe, his gaze stopping on her gloved hands. "You're not exactly what I expected," he stated flatly. Stung, Miriam forced a gracious smile. But Harding waved away her greeting. He explained with an air of mounting disapproval that he had required a bride skilled in housekeeping, preserving meats, tending livestock, and other practical tasks. "Your letters hinted at education," he said, "but I didn't anticipate it meant classical piano training. We have no use for preludes and sonatas on a working ranch." Miriam swallowed hard, her mind drifting back to the hours spent teaching in Boston, her love for music that had shaped her very soul. "I can adapt, Mr. Harding." She tried to assure him, her voice taut. "I'm capable of learning any skill needed to make your ranch a success," yet Harding's stony gaze showed no softening. He claimed her refined manner, her talk of Chopin languages and the arts would only impede daily ranch work. "This territory prizes utility," he concluded. "I fear you'd be a liability then." As though awarding her a consolation prize, he thrust a small purse of coins into her palm, instructing her to book return passage to Boston on the next stage departing in 2 days. Every pair of eyes in the settlement seemed fixed on Miriam. She felt humiliation well up. Yet she held her posture like the teacher she was refusing to crumble in public. By the time Harding stalked away, muttering something about highbrow frivolities, Miriam found herself alone, uncertain where to go. The few passers-by who offered her sympathetic glances did not extend practical assistance. One or two even sneered, clearly amused by the notion of a cultured Easterner being cast aside as useless. Half in a daze, Miriam trudged to the Silver Lantern, an inn run by Mrs. Abbott, who took in her trembling appearance with a knowing sigh. "You'll be wanting a room?" the older woman asked, with a voice that hovered between compassion and mild exasperation. Miriam set down the small pouch of coins, her entire fortune, after buying stage fare. Just for 2 nights, she managed her tone strangely hollow. Mrs. Abbott gave a brisk nod. Don't let that Harding upset you. Dear men like him, plenty of bark. Little else, yet even the innkeeper's faint sympathy did little to quell Miriam's sense of betrayal. She had imagined forging a new life here, a chance at marriage, or at least purpose beyond Boston's cramped opportunities. Now with only a few coins and no job prospects, she sat in a dim, cramped room fighting off tears. By evening, word of Harding's rejection had spread. From the window, Miriam watched ranch hands saunter past, heard snippets of conversation drifting upward. Poor woman. Too high class for her own good, or should have known a piano teacher wouldn't cut it out here. With no illusions left about becoming Harding's wife, she weighed her meager options. Return east in shame, or remain in Wyoming on borrowed time, hoping for a miracle. She barely slept, anxiety weaving with exhaustion, leaving her in a haze of fatigue when dawn arrived. That second morning in Silver Creek brought an unexpected visitor. Mrs. Abbott knocked gently at Miriam's door, announcing a gentleman downstairs asking for her. He said his name is Alexander Grayson, owns Cottonwood Ranch. I've known him years. He's a fair man. He'd like a word. Miriam's initial suspicion gave way to grudging curiosity. If another rancher was offering pity, or worse, some unsavory proposition, she would reject it outright. Still, she had little to lose by meeting him, so she brushed her hair, donned her best surviving dress, and descended. The inn saloon room was sparsely populated at that hour, giving Miriam a clear line of sight to the man who rose politely upon her approach. Alexander Grayson, taller than Harding lean, but broad-shouldered from ranch labor, with a calm, almost pensive demeanor. His eyes, gray as a storm cloud, betrayed a quick intelligence as he surveyed her with neither condescension nor pity. Miss Montague, he greeted in a measured tone. Thank you for meeting me. May we sit? Her tension eased slightly. She nodded. Settling at a small table, she braced for another critique. Instead, Grayson explained that he needed a tutor for his daughter, Clara, who was nearly 12. She's an avid reader, he said, but I fear I've taught all I can. She deserves more formal instruction. Reading, writing, arithmetic, and if you can teach piano well, that might be a godsend. Clara's been begging for lessons. Miriam blinked, startled. A rancher who prioritizes classical music? He smiled wryly. Perhaps you've heard we Wyoming cattlemen are all illiterate brutes, yes? I assure you I care more about my daughter's mind than my neighbor's opinions. After what Harding had said, it felt surreal to hear a rancher championing the very refinement she'd been chastised for. Cautiously, Miriam inquired about pay and living conditions. Grayson offered lodging in a small separate suite at the ranch house, as well as a wage that would let her save money should she eventually choose to leave. She tried to mask her relief. Why me, though? I'm an utter stranger, she pressed. The entire town must be buzzing with how impractical I am. Grayson's expression turned sympathetic but resolute. I heard Harding's dismissive words. My daughter doesn't need a stable hand. She needs someone with the knowledge to broaden her horizons, who can teach her more than roping and canning. You Miss Montague can do that evening after politely refusing Mrs. Abbott's attempts to glean details. Miriam prepared her belongings once more. By morning, she would ride with Grayson to Cottonwood Ranch, a gamble of epic proportions. She scarcely slept, her mind torn between excitement and the lingering sting of Harding's rejection. But in the early dawn, she stepped onto Grayson's wagon, her valise and music case safely stowed. As the wagon rumbled away from the dusty settlement, Harding's mocking words faded behind her. Ahead lay a horizon of open grasslands and pine-studded slopes. Yet the greatest unknown wasn't the land. It was Grayson himself. Could he truly value her so-called refinements in a territory famed for practicality? She clutched the cameo brooch her mother's and closed her eyes, recalling the hush of Boston's music halls. Perhaps, just perhaps, she would find a new kind of harmony out here. And so she departed Silver Creek for Cottonwood Ranch, not knowing she was about to forge a life no less dramatic than the notes that once filled her beloved piano room. The late morning sun cast a bright glare on the rolling hills as Alexander Grayson guided his wagon through winding dirt tracks. Miriam perched beside him, kept one hand braced against the seat, the other clutching the small trunk, holding her few possessions. In the distance, the land spread out in a quilt of grasses, wildflowers and scattered pines far different from any place she'd known. Her senses filled with the pungent tang of sage on the breeze and the crunch of gravel under wagon wheels. When Grayson pulled the horses to a stop atop a gentle rise, he gestured at the valley below. Cottonwood Ranch, he announced simply. From that vantage, Miriam saw a modest two-story farmhouse with a porch, a sprawling barn, and smaller outbuildings forming a horseshoe around a central yard. Fenced pastures stretched in several directions, dotted with grazing cattle. A winding creek flanked by cottonwood trees snaked through the property, giving the ranch its name. Miriam felt a hint of awe at the tranquility of the scene, so different from the bustle of Boston or the uneasy tension of Silver Creek. A figure darted from the house the moment they pulled up. Clara, dark-haired and freckle-faced, flew across the yard, halting only when Grayson gave a half-smile. "Clara, this is Miss Montague," he said. Clara's eyes shone with curiosity. "Pleased to meet you," she said, her diction precise as though she'd practiced it. Miriam returned the greeting, noting the girl's earnestness. She seemed alert to every word, a small reflection of her father's calm intelligence. But bubbling with youthful enthusiasm, Mrs. Caldwell, the housekeeper who oversaw cooking and basic cleaning, bustled out next. A short, no-nonsense woman with calloused hands, she studied Miriam critically before giving a short nod. "Your rooms are ready," Mrs. Caldwell said, gesturing for Miriam to follow. Indeed, as they entered the farmhouse and moved through a side hallway, Miriam found a small but clean suite of 2 rooms, a bedroom with a real bed, and linens, plus a tiny sitting area with a desk. Sunlight poured in through the windows, and a vase of wildflowers brightened the wooden table. "This is far more than I expected," Miriam admitted, touched by the thoughtfulness. "It's not a palace," Grayson remarked from the doorway, "but we try to keep a certain standard. This ranch was my wife's dream, too. She passed when Clara was small, but the place still bears her touches." A flicker of pain crossed his features, gone as swiftly as it appeared. With that, he excused himself to handle ranch business. Leaving Miriam to unpack, that afternoon Miriam met with Clara in a small study, really a corner of the farmhouse that contained a battered desk, a shelf of books, and to her surprise, a few pages of scrawled music. The girl blushed. "I love music," she explained shyly, "but we don't have a piano. Pa got me a tiny keyboard drawn on wood, so I practice in my head." Miriam's heart squeezed. She admired the child's resourcefulness. Boston students sometimes complained about daily practice on real instruments. Here was a child who memorized keys from a sketch, forging melodies in her imagination. They spent hours assessing Clara's reading, math, and general knowledge. Miriam discovered a bright, inquisitive mind, hungry for more than the rudimentary schooling Grayson had been able to provide. "Trees," Clara said, glancing affectionately out the window where Grayson and 2 ranch hands were herding cattle. "But he's always busy. We read books together, on Sundays though, poetry even. He says you can find culture anywhere if you look." Miriam marveled inwardly. So that was how a frontier rancher had come to value her literary and musical background. He had chosen to cultivate learning in unexpected ways. By supper, Miriam felt a twinge of optimism. She might truly be needed here. The kitchen table laden with stew, fresh bread and boiled vegetables was modest but welcoming. Grayson's conversation focused on ranch matters, hay yields, mending fences, the possibility of a tough winter. But he made a point to ask Miriam's impressions so far. "Clara's advanced in arithmetic," Miriam replied. "We can build from that, incorporating more robust geometry. As for music, we'll do what we can until a real instrument can be acquired." Mrs. Caldwell occasionally chimed in with practical advice for scheduling lessons around daily chores. Clara listened raptly, as though every logistical detail might hold the key to her next educational milestone. Miriam, for her part, realized how her life had been a closed circle in Boston, rarely venturing beyond academic and musical pursuits. Now she found herself discussing cattle feed cycles alongside grammar lessons, forging a sense of synergy she had never imagined possible. Yet a small voice inside reminded her that all was not settled. She was an unmarried governess living under the same roof as a widower. In Boston, that arrangement would be scandalous. Even in Silver Creek, no doubt tongues would wag, though perhaps less viciously if her role remained purely instructional. Still, she recalled Harding's cutting remarks, frivolous, ornamental. So far, Grayson's staff and neighbors had not voiced such hostility, but old prejudices might emerge if she stayed indefinitely. Late that night, after Claire had been tucked into bed with a book of fables, Miriam found herself on the front porch, watching stars glimmer in the wide Wyoming sky. Grayson joined her, offering a mild grin in the darkness. "I hope you're settling all right. I realize this is quite different from Boston. Miriam nodded. Different, yes, but I'm grateful for this chance. If Harding had not, she broke off, flushing. It felt awkward to mention Harding's rejection so plainly. Grayson nodded, a shadow crossing his face. I know how he is. I once asked him to partner on a land deal, but he refused, calling me too idealistic. People like him want everything boiled down to pure utility. He paused and said softly, but you can't measure a child's mind or a piece of music in mere dollars and cents. Some things matter more. The conversation stirred an uneasy warmth in Miriam. She realized that for the first time since leaving Boston, she felt not just tolerated but valued. Even if Grayson's words were more practical than romantic, they resonated with her longing for a place where her knowledge was recognized. She retreated to her quarters that night feeling both lighter and strangely unsettled, because for all her resolve, she knew she was stepping into uncharted territory. The question was whether she and Grayson could navigate these complexities, practical, social, and emotional, together. Summer waned in the Wyoming highlands, painting the grasslands a tawny gold and sending cooler breezes through the cottonwoods. Weeks slipped by shaping a new rhythm at Cottonwood Ranch. Each morning, Miriam rose early to plan lessons, integrating basic arithmetic with reading, writing, and music theory for Clara. By mid-morning, the girl was alert and eager, devouring knowledge with a fervor that often amused Mrs. Caldwell, who teased Clara about being the ranch's future professor. In the afternoons, Miriam adapted to ranch routines, at first as a curious observer, then gradually as a willing helper. She never imagined learning to churn butter or drive a small cart of supplies to the back pasture would align with her piano teaching hands. Yet there she was, discovering satisfaction in bridging these seemingly disparate worlds. Meanwhile, Alexander Grayson moved through his tasks with unwavering calm, ensuring the ranch's finances, expansions, and repairs stayed on track. He'd glance her way, sometimes a thoughtful expression on his face, as though silently weighing how their lives might intertwine. One weekend, they made a brief trip into Silver Creek for supplies. Miriam tensed, expecting gossip or condescension, but the townsfolk seemed more curious than hostile. A few recognized her from that humiliating day on Main Street, yet when they saw how Grayson introduced her as Miss Montague, our teacher, they offered nods or polite greetings rather than scorn. Evidently, Harding's disregard carried less weight now that rumors circulated of his own questionable dealings and haughty demeanor. Perhaps a few even admired Miriam's resilience, forging a second chance where she'd first been dismissed. Back at Cottonwood Ranch, a new complication arose, the unspoken bond growing between Miriam and Grayson. It took subtle forms. She noticed how he lingered when dropping off library volumes, or how his eyes lit up when she described Clara's progress on memorizing a Bach piece. Sometimes while Clara practiced with drawn keys, they would exchange a quiet remark, a shared smile, yet both carefully kept a professional distance, wary of stirring potential scandal. Even so, Mrs. Caldwell occasionally cast them knowing looks, her lips curving in a wry half-smile. One evening after Clara slept, Grayson invited Miriam to the ranch's study. Lamplight fell across tidy shelves crammed with an eclectic range of books, everything from agricultural manuals to classical poetry. On a side table lay sketches, obviously done by Grayson, capturing the ranch's vistas, rolling fields under shifting skies, the silhouette of cottonwoods by moonlight. Miriam had never expected a rancher to dabble in art. She picked one up, heart twisting at the detailed shading. "These are lovely," she whispered. "Have you trained in drawing?" He shrugged, some mostly self-taught. "I've studied a few art books, but it's a personal hobby." A flicker of hesitation crossed his face, as if he wasn't used to sharing such intimate pursuits. Over cups of tea, he told her about losing his wife Eleanor to a fever years ago, leaving him with a newborn Clara and a ranch to manage. His father had considered him soft for indulging in art, but he insisted that creativity was what sustained him through the toughest frontier challenges. Miriam listened with empathy, thinking how her own father's academic background had clashed with Boston's more commercial leanings. "We share a knack for existing between worlds." Grayson observed, a rueful smile touching his lips. Neither purely ranch nor purely city, neither wholly pragmatic nor wholly refined. The conversation lingered in her mind long after he escorted her back to her quarters. Was it possible that a man who respected both beauty and endurance, a father devoted to nurturing his child's intellect, and an uncertain culture, starved piano teacher from Boston, could build a real partnership? The seeds of that question took root, yet no easy answers followed. She still wrestled with the limitations of their arrangement, uncertain how townspeople might react if they suspected something deeper than a governess-employer relationship. Clara's lessons flourished. Miriam introduced advanced grammar bits of French and even some geometry. The girl had a knack for it all, though she repeatedly asked, "When will we get a proper piano?" With a wry grin, Miriam would note that they must first see if the ranch's finances allowed. Each time Clara's face fell slightly, reminding Miriam how precarious the child's musical dreams were. How Miriam yearned to bring the full wonder of piano chords to these silent rooms. She herself missed the tactile elegance of ivory keys beneath her fingers, the resonance that made the soul soar. But finances had grown tight. Grayson confided one evening that an expansion of their cattle herd was delayed by a slump in beef prices. He also worried about rustlers rumored to roam the territory bolder with each passing year. He'd heard from neighbors that men who lost everything and failed gold or silver mines sometimes turned to theft. The ranch hands maintained vigilance, but it was still an open frontier. "We can't let fear stop us, though," he said. "We keep forging ahead, investing in the future like Clara's learning, or you're living here." At times, the presence of old heartbreak lurked. Miriam occasionally caught mention of Harding's name from local chatter, hearing that he'd married a young woman from Baltimore, a lady presumably more attuned to his expectations. Did Miriam feel bitterness? Sometimes. But mostly she felt relief that she hadn't been yoked to a man who saw her talents as foolish trivialities. She tried to push aside any comparisons. Her quiet, blossoming connection with Grayson was based on mutual respect, not transaction. A turning point came when Clara proudly displayed a small composition she'd created for piano, scribbled on homemade staff paper. The arrangement was rough, lacking certain fundamentals, but the spark of invention was there. She had combined a traditional Western ballad with a few formal elements gleaned from her music books. Over supper, the girl hesitantly asked Miriam to evaluate it. Miriam offered gentle corrections and suggestions, emphasizing how intervals and harmonies work. Clara beamed, exclaiming she'd rewrite it and show them again by week's end. Grayson, silent for most of the lesson, watched with an expression that mingled paternal pride and cautious hope. The girl was bridging the ranch's everyday life with classical forms, forging something new. Was that not exactly what Miriam herself was learning, how to merge two worlds? That night on her small desk, Miriam began jotting down lines of her own composition, a piece that somehow captured the wind in the cottonwoods, the hush of twilight and the warmth she felt within these rough-hewn walls. She had never done so in Boston. There she only taught existing pieces, never creating new melodies. But here the frontier's stark beauty and the synergy with Grayson's hidden artistry spurred her forward. She wrote late into the night by lamplight, letting the hush of the ranch feed her imagination. Maybe, just maybe, she was finding more than an occupation. Maybe she was finding a home and something akin to love. Harvest season arrived, bringing a new pace of life to Cottonwood Ranch. Early dawn saw wagons roll out for the fields, men loading hay bales while Clara practiced her lessons in advanced reading comprehension. Miriam, uncertain whether a piano teacher's hands were fit for farm labor, discovered they were indeed capable enough to help gather apples from the small orchard behind the barn. The orchard yielded only a modest harvest, but Mrs. Caldwell insisted every apple, even the bruised ones, be put to use in pies, preserves, or cider. Despite the bustle, pockets of quiet emerged, allowing Miriam to see deeper into Grayson's mind. In the late afternoons after chores, they sometimes strolled the ranch perimeter to check fences. On one such walk, she admitted, "I never imagined I'd find a sense of fulfillment by helping stack hay or discussing cattle breeding cycles. But it all fits, somehow." Grayson's chuckle was low, warm. "Surprised me too how satisfying it can be to see something tangible flourish under your care, like orchard trees or a child's intellect, or an idea about bridging the gap between frontier needs and refined culture." Yet tension lurked, especially on the edges of the ranch, where rumors persisted about bandits. Even Silver Creek gossiped about rustling. Miriam overheard a conversation at the mercantile. Oh, people worried that with beef prices low, unscrupulous characters might see rustling as quick cash, she mentioned. Her concern to Grayson, who acknowledged the risk but refused to live in fear. "We'll handle it if it comes," he said firmly. "This ranch stands because we don't run from trouble." The statement felt like a promise, not just about rustlers, but about everything in his life. A brighter event arrived in the form of the Silver Creek Fall Fair. The ranchers and townsfolk would gather to celebrate the season's end, exchanging goods, showing livestock, and hosting a small cultural showcase. Clara pleaded to attend, excited to see a rumored traveling musician who might bring a real piano. Miriam was torn. Did she want to face the town's curious stares again? But Grayson seemed untroubled by potential gossip. "We can't hide," he said matter-of-factly. "It's better to meet them openly." Clara deserves to see the fair, so they loaded the wagon one crisp morning, traveling the now familiar route to the settlement. The fair spread across an open field near the schoolhouse with booths displaying quilts, preserves leatherwork, and local produce. A makeshift stage at one end promised some manner of performance. Miriam recognized a handful of people who cast her questioning glances, but no one openly insulted her. In fact, many were polite if distant. She wondered if Harding's negativity had waned now that he'd married. Word had it that Harding's bride was charming enough, but also that the man's finances were shaky. She tried not to indulge in unkind satisfaction. Moving through the fair, Clara raced excitedly to see the newly arrived piano, a battered upright being tuned by a dusty traveler. The man hammered out chords, adjusting pins. Clara's face shone with longing. "Can I try it, Pa?" "Please," Grayson hesitated, eyeing the man who demanded a small fee for each trial. Miriam intervened, paying the coin. That moment, hearing Clara strike the keys in halting chords nearly brought Miriam to tears. The tone was tinny and out of tune, but it was real. The child's eyes sparkled as she picked out a snippet of her composition, fumbling but determined. A familiar voice interrupted, dripping with faint sarcasm. "Quite the progression, Miss Montague, from stagecoaches to county fairs. Though I'm unsure how much actual culture one can glean from a battered upright in a pasture." Miriam turned to see Richard Harding, no longer alone but with an elegant, well-dressed woman on his arm. He introduced her as Teresa Harding, a refined lady from Baltimore. Harding's posture exuded condescension as he flicked a glance from Miriam to Clara, clearly unimpressed. "I see you've attached yourself to Alexander Grayson's ranch. Found a new benefactor." Heat rose in Miriam's cheeks, but before she could respond, Grayson stepped forward calmly. "Harding, a fair day for your usual barbs." Clara's playing faltered, her gaze darting anxiously between them. Harding's new wife looked perplexed, as if unsure why the tension was so high. Harding, however, pressed his point. "I only note that Miss Montague once sought marriage with me, an alliance she simply wasn't fitted for. Now she imposes on your ranch. Let's hope you don't regret it, Grayson." Miriam's relief, Grayson did not bristle. Instead, he pinned Harding with a level stare. "The only thing I regret is watching a man's arrogance overshadow true values," he said quietly. Harding stiffened, turning red. Teresa, realizing a confrontation was brewing, tugged his arm, urging him away. "Richard, let's not cause a scene." They departed in a swirl of tension, leaving Miriam's heart hammering. Clara stared at the keys, her earlier enthusiasm dimmed. Grayson placed a reassuring hand on Clara's shoulder. "Remember the music, not the bluster," he whispered. "He has no power here." Miriam nodded in silent agreement, though her stomach churned. She'd thought she'd moved past Harding's scorn, yet the man's presence reminded her how tenuous her position remained. In some eyes, she forced a smile for Clara, who resumed playing. Soon the tinkling melody pushed away the lingering bitterness of Harding's words. Later, as they strolled the fair, they encountered a few acquaintances. A ranch wife praised Clara's reading skills, and an older farmer marveled at the child's ability to speak basic French. "Grayson, you're raising a scholar out here in cow country," the farmer joked. "Better keep that teacher around so the rest of us can benefit too." Miriam smiled politely, pleased that not everyone shared Harding's narrow vision. That evening, they returned to Cottonwood Ranch with more than a wagon full of supplies. Clara was flush with pride, having experienced her first real piano. Miriam harbored an undercurrent of relief. Harding's negativity, notwithstanding the day had proven that the local community was not uniformly hostile. In fact, many seemed intrigued by the notion of bridging cultural refinement with frontier practicality. Perhaps it was simply the unstoppable wave of civilization moving westward, or perhaps it was something more personal, the authenticity of Grayson's and by extension Miriam's commitment to weaving art into daily ranch life. Supper was a subdued, tired affair. Clara dozed off halfway through. Mrs. Caldwell cleared plates with minimal chatter. Afterward, Miriam lingered in the front room. Grayson joined her expression, thoughtful. "I'm sorry. Harding confronted you again," he said quietly. Miriam exhaled. "I'd nearly forgotten how cruel he could be. He humiliates me, then appears with a new, more socially acceptable bride." To her surprise, Grayson pressed a gentle hand over hers. "You should never apologize for the education and grace you possess. Harding's failings are his alone." The warmth of that touch and his words made her heart flutter. They parted soon after it, each aware that an invisible line had been drawn. Both recognized the stirring of feelings that reached beyond a professional arrangement. Yet neither had the courage to speak it aloud, still too conscious of small-town gossip, still cautious about tangling personal and professional roles. For the moment, it was enough to stand side by side, forging a quiet alliance against those who dismissed frivolous culture. Out here in the dusk, with the ranch's lantern casting a soft glow, Miriam Montague felt more acceptance and perhaps more love than she had ever felt in Boston's polished parlors. Autumn's last weeks brought swirling winds and the first bite of winter in the air. Cottonwood Ranch prepared for the cold season by stocking extra feed, reinforcing fence lines, and ensuring the barn could shelter the herd against blizzards. Miriam, never having experienced such frontier winters, listened carefully to the older ranch hands' stories of past snowstorms that stranded travelers and froze livestock. She realized that out here, survival demanded a synergy between mindful planning and sheer resilience. All the while, Clara's lessons progressed at an astonishing pace. She now wrote small compositions, blending folksy Western ballads with rudimentary classical techniques gleaned from Miriam's instruction. She pored over the single battered music theory book Miriam had brought from Boston, copying passages into her notebooks. Miriam suspected a real piano would transform the girl's potential, but buying one was still out of reach, given the ranch's precarious finances. Yet every day, Clara asked hopeful questions, daydreaming about real chords beneath her fingertips. As nights grew longer, Miriam began a personal project. Using the ranch's ledger paper with Grayson's permission, she started drafting a rudimentary frontier piano method, a manual that recognized how some children might not have full instruments, relying instead on imaginative practice. It integrated the practicality of chords memorized from lines on a wood plank, trusting that once a real piano was available, muscle memory and theoretical knowledge would converge. She teased out ideas with Alexander in the evenings while Clara slept, culminating in gentle debates about the nature of music art and how frontier life could absorb them. Each conversation strengthened her conviction that culture need not be fragile in the wilderness. It could adapt and flourish as wildflowers do in rocky soil. One mild late autumn morning, Clara burst into the kitchen, eyes sparkling. "Ah, Pa, Miss Montague, guess what? The carpenter in Silver Creek says a second-hand upright might be available next month if he can fix it." Grayson looked to Miriam, an unspoken question in his gaze. Was it feasible? Miriam felt her own heart skip. A second-hand upright that could change everything for Clara's progress. But Grayson hesitated, mentally calculating costs. The ranch still felt the sting of lowered beef prices, and rumors of rustlers had not abated. Although no direct theft had occurred yet, vigilance was constant. Mrs. Caldwell coughed, offering a practical note. "If we do get snowed in, at least Clara would have something to keep busy." Eventually, Grayson decided they would check the piano's condition soon. "We'll manage," he told Miriam. "Clara's grown so much under your tutelage, it seems wrong to hold her back." That evening, as they reviewed ranch accounts, Miriam realized more than ever how Grayson balanced every purchase against future ranch stability. The ranch's men might tease him for reading literature or dabbling in sketch art, but they never doubted his skill at planning. She admired this blend of forward-thinking artistry and disciplined finance. It echoed her own desire to fuse classical refinement with everyday practicality. Meanwhile, tension with Harding had not vanished. On a rare supply trip to Silver Creek, Miriam overheard two older women gossiping about how Harding was stirring up moral concerns over her arrangement at Cottonwood. "He calls her overeducated. Living in sin," one whispered. The other scolded her companion for prying, but the damage was done. Miriam returned to the wagon, face aflame. Grayson, noting her distress, calmly reassured her that such talk held little sway, yet she fretted about how these rumors might affect Clara, or whether it could hamper Grayson's standing in town. The local sheriff, an affable but pragmatic fellow, had once told her quietly that he believed a few folks were just threatened by new ideas, by the notion that a piano teacher might be valuable. "Don't let him scare you," the sheriff had said, tipping his hat. "Folks who matter see the sense in it." As the first snows dusted the ranch, Miriam spent more time indoors. Her small suite became a cozy enclave where she organized lesson materials, wrote letters to her few Boston acquaintances, and peered out at the transformed landscape, a white canvas stretching toward distant hills. Grayson and the ranch hands bundled in heavy coats, focusing on ensuring the herd had enough shelter. Especially with rustling rumors intensifying, he set up a patrol schedule, not wishing to be taken off guard. One night, a sudden crack of gunfire shattered the silent gloom. Heart pounding, Miriam rushed to the parlor window, glimpsing faint lantern lights far across the fields. She saw Grayson stride outside, rifle in hand, while Mrs. Caldwell ushered Clara and Miriam to remain indoors. The minutes dragged like hours. Miriam braced for the worst memories of Harding's threats swirling in her mind, but eventually Grayson returned, breath visible in the cold. "False alarm," he said, wiping sweat from his brow. "Some traveler's horse spooked near the eastern fence. No sign of rustlers. But we can't be too careful." Clara, trembling from the adrenaline, insisted on staying close to Miriam all night, cradling the child's shaking shoulders. Miriam realized how deeply she cared for Clara, not just as a student, but almost as a daughter figure. The near scare magnified how vulnerable they all were in this frontier environment. "It's all right," she whispered to the frightened girl. "Your father is here, we're safe." But the pounding of her own heart told her that safety was never guaranteed. They were forging a life on precarious soil, balancing the gentleness of music instruction against the harsh possibilities of bandit raids. As winter tightened its grip, the ranch turned inward, huddling around fireplaces and kerosene lamps. Time not spent on chores or feeding livestock was devoted to reading, drawing, or listening to the howling wind. Grayson's quiet presence, whether detailing new sketches or simply sipping coffee at the kitchen table, provided a pillar of support. Though they rarely spoke of it, an unspoken closeness had seeped into their daily rhythms. Mrs. Caldwell, observing their near-silent communication, occasionally smirked, but said nothing. Even the ranch hands who teased Miriam about her fancy ways seemed content to see her influence remain. Little did they all realize that the storm was not purely meteorological, that events on the horizon would force them to confront deeper challenges and ultimately reaffirm the fragile but unbreakable bond forming between them. For now, with snow swirling outside and the glow of lamplight spilling from each window, they let the hush of winter cradle the seeds of a future neither wholly planned nor fully understood, but distinctly theirs. News of a traveling railroad commission man fanned excitement and anxiety through the region. The rumor was that the railroad might carve a spur line closer to Silver Creek, potentially skyrocketing land values, but also attracting all kinds of speculators, good and bad. Grayson fretted in private that such changes might spark more rustling or unscrupulous land grabs. Miriam overheard conversation about men who saw the West's transformation purely in terms of profit, discounting the intangible worth of a well-educated community. In this tense context, Richard Harding reappeared like a vulture scenting opportunity. He began dropping hints that if Grayson ever tired of cultural experiments, he'd be glad to buy Cottonwood Ranch at a price just short of insulting. Grayson politely rejected each overture. "I'm building a legacy for my daughter," he told Harding coldly, "and I won't sell to a man who scorns everything I stand for." Harding, unruffled, commented that the future belonged to railroads and expansion, not piano lessons in log cabins. The undertone was that if Grayson refused to adapt, circumstances might force his hand. Miriam, hearing these stories secondhand, felt a chill. The ranch was hardly a fortress. If the rumors of rustlers had any tie to Harding's ambition, a confrontation might be inevitable. Then one frosty dawn, Grayson returned from the outskirts of the ranch with disturbing news. They'd found fresh tracks that suggested a group of horsemen had been scouting. Some fence had been tampered with, though no cattle were missing yet. In the following days, the ranch hands kept night watches, anticipating a possible raid. It never came, but the tension mounted. Clara sensed the undercurrent, peppering her father with questions. Miriam saw how Grayson tried to maintain calm for his daughter's sake, while scanning the horizon with guarded vigilance. Through it all, Clara's academic and musical progress provided a bright counterpoint. More than once, Miriam or Mrs. Caldwell caught Grayson listening outside the makeshift study, a soft pride in his eyes as Clara practiced vocal exercises or recited lines from classical literature. The girl's thirst for knowledge was unquenchable, and Miriam found each day more rewarding than the last, despite the anxiety swirling around them. Meanwhile, a new form of tension blossomed between Miriam and Grayson. A tension that had nothing to do with rustlers or land deals, but with the closeness of their personal connection. The small touches, his hand briefly brushing hers as they consulted on teaching materials, and the lingering looks after supper spoke volumes. Yet the swirl of external challenges kept them from addressing it openly. That changed one evening after a minor confrontation in Silver Creek. They'd come for the monthly teachers' meeting. The local school teacher had invited Miriam to share resources. Harding cornered Grayson in the mercantile, spewing insinuations about how improper it was for an unmarried woman to reside at Cottonwood full-time. He made certain townspeople overheard painting Miriam as some Eastern busybody with illusions of grandeur. Grayson, rarely provoked, lost his usual composure enough to snap, "Better illusions of grandeur than illusions of morality," causing a small uproar that ended with Harding storming out. Miriam was mortified to see two women glare her way. She endured it, but the humiliation stung deeper than she expected. Later on the drive back, Clara dozed in the wagon bed under blankets while Miriam sat stiffly beside Grayson, eyes wet from unspent tears. She muttered an apology for the scene, but he brushed it aside. "I'll not have him slander you," he said firmly. Under the stark moonlight, she saw the lines of concern carved into his face, matching her own frustration. "Sometimes I wonder if I should go," she whispered. End the talk. Grayson reined the horses to a slow stop near a stand of pines. He turned to face her. "Don't say that. You've made Clara's world richer, mine too. If we let fear of gossip decide, we lose what matters." Her heart pounded, bracing for a deeper confession, but Clara stirred awake, calling for them. The moment slipped away. They resumed traveling, returning to the ranch in tense silence. But that night, Miriam lay awake, haunted by both the possibilities of staying and the challenges it entailed. Was it selfish to remain, risking reputational damage to the ranch? Or was her presence genuinely worthwhile enough to justify the rumors? A new dawn brought new developments. In a letter from her uncle Albert Montague, a distant relative who had refused to help when her parents died, came startling news: her maternal grandfather had passed, leaving Miriam a substantial inheritance of artwork, with instructions to see it publicly displayed somewhere it could do the most good. She read the letter thrice, scarcely believing the mention of valuable paintings and funds. Her pulse quickened at the notion that she might secure a real piano for Clara or sponsor more formal schooling. Yet it also implied that her future might pull her back east. She locked the letter away for the moment, uncertain how to broach the topic. In the midst of her confusion, an incident occurred that shook the ranch to its core. While Grayson and Three Hands rode, the northern boundary rustlers struck from the south, cutting fences, scattering the smaller herd of prize breeding cattle. Alarmed ranch hands rushed to gather them, but the bandits escaped with several prime steers. Tension exploded. Clara stood on the porch, tears threatening, while Mrs. Caldwell readied a rifle she hadn't touched in years. Miriam tried to calm them, but dread coiled in her stomach. Harding's rumored involvement hovered in the back of everyone's mind. When Grayson returned, he was grim-faced, verifying the count. A dozen steers gone. Tracks suggested a group had cut through a shallow ravine. The entire fiasco took mere minutes. Yet the ranch's livelihood had been wounded. That evening, a hush lay over the dinner table. Clara ate little, haunted by the knowledge that real danger prowled outside. Miriam felt powerless, offering only sympathetic glances. Then unexpectedly, Grayson said, "I won't let them destroy what we built. We'll rebuild, find ways to protect the herd." He shot Miriam a pointed look, as if including her in the we. Miriam recognized that if the rustling persisted, financial strain would mount, overshadowing Clara's lessons and any further cultural pursuits. she wanted to voice her devotion to, declare she wouldn't abandon them. But she was torn. What about the inheritance from her grandfather's estate? Was she on the brink of inheriting a fortune that could rescue the ranch? Or would that simply entangle them further? Days later, Sheriff Ellis visited, confirming that rumors linked Harding's associates to rustling, lacking concrete evidence, though arrests remained elusive. The sheriff advised caution. As talk of farmland sabotage grew, some ranchers sold out early to speculators. Grayson refused. Clara's hopeful face stiffened into apprehension, each stolen steer, proof that maybe her father couldn't protect everything. Miriam felt an urgency to act. She had an inheritance that might stabilize the ranch, but revealing it to Grayson might shift their dynamic entirely. Plus, the estate's legal demands might require her to return east for months or indefinitely. Could she tear herself away from Cottonwood Ranch, from the child who needed her, from the man she... When Grayson invited her on a short horseback ride to clear their minds, she agreed, though her heart fluttered. She rode a gentle mare while he guided them up a rocky slope for a panoramic view, their wind tousling their hair. He spoke softly. Harding sees only profit. Rustling is a means to an end. He aims to force me out so he can use this land for rail developments. Miriam suppressed a shiver. What if he succeeds financially no matter what we do? Grayson's gaze locked with hers. I can't promise victory, but I promise not to surrender. The question is, do you trust me in our life here enough to stay and see it through? Tears glimmered in Miriam's eyes. She wanted to say yes unequivocally, yet the letter from her uncle pulsed in her mind. I do trust you, she said softly, but circumstances may force decisions neither of us wants. Something flickered in his expression. Hope tinted by fear. The future was uncertain, overshadowed by external pressures. Still in that moment, perched together on a windy bluff, both recognized that the bridging of two worlds, her refined Eastern background and his frontier pragmatism, was an endeavor that might anchor them against all storms. All speculation about Harding's intentions became reality. One raw morning, when several official-looking men arrived at Cottonwood Ranch, they dismounted from the horses bearing saddlebags embossed with the Wyoming Northern Railroad Commission insignia. Leading them was a stern-faced official, Mr. Levington, who politely informed Grayson that a new route survey might slice across part of his land, an eminent domain situation, if the commission deemed it in the public interest. Miriam, watching from a distance, saw Grayson's jaw tighten. He politely demanded details, but the men offered only vague reassurances and insisted on touring the property. When they returned, Mr. Levington asked whether Grayson intended to sell. At his refusal, the official noted, they could forcibly claim a portion for railway easement. Harding's name came up. Miriam didn't catch all the nuances, but she recognized the undertone. Harding was pulling strings to make Grayson's ranch worthless or easily acquired. The men left with bureaucratic politeness, leaving an uneasy hush. Clara peeked around the porch, eyes large with worry. Mrs. Caldwell grumbled about railroad men who saw only lines on a map, ignoring real families. Grayson finally turned to Miriam. Expression grim. They'll likely try to starve us out or intimidate us. If we can't keep finances afloat, we might be forced to sell that night alone in her quarters. Miriam reread her Uncle Albert's letter. The estate left by her grandfather, artworks valued at tens of thousands, plus some cash reserves, was waiting for her to claim. It could rescue the ranch from financial ruin or fund expansions that thwarted Harding's sabotage. But there was a catch. The legalities required a formal presence in Boston, plus the condition that the collection be displayed publicly in a recognized cultural venue. Did that mean she had to leave for months? Possibly. She felt a surge of indignation that fate was so complicated. Her place was with these people now. Yet a portion of her heart recognized the draw of that inheritance. If used wisely, it could secure the ranch and also realize her dream of making art accessible, bridging high culture and frontier practicality. She told no one yet, still paralyzed by indecision. Then disaster struck again. An early blizzard swept in from the northwest, dumping snow across the valley and locking them in for days. Grayson and his hands struggled to keep the cattle fed, breaking ice on the creek so they could drink. Rustlers seemed deterred by the storm at least, but the ranch itself teetered on the edge of crisis. Grayson calculated that if he lost more cattle or if the railroad forcibly claimed the best grazing land, he might not break even this season. Miriam overheard him muttering to himself, I won't let them take it. Not after all we've built. In the midst of this turmoil, Clara hovered near Miriam, seeking comfort. Miss Montague, do you think I'll ever get a real piano? The question stung Miriam, forced to smile. We must have faith, Clara. One day you'll play a genuine instrument, not just that plank. Inside, though, she wondered if the ranch's days were numbered. Mrs. Caldwell said nothing but cast concerned glances. Only her daily tasks, cooking, cleaning, offering, occasional blunt wisdom, kept the household from unraveling. A respite arrived unexpectedly in the shape of Teresa Harding Richards' wife, who rode up during a lull in the storm. Shivering in a fine wool cloak, she confessed she had left her husband after discovering the lengths he'd gone to sabotage Grayson. "I want no part of his schemes," she said, voice trembling. She offered them letters that incriminated Harding in orchestrating, rustling with a local gang. She herself had secretly documented conversations sickened by the scale of his betrayal. "He aims to ruin you, Mr. Grayson, so he can buy the land cheaply and resell it to the railroad at a grand profit," Teresa said, face flushed with remorse. Shocked, Miriam and Grayson pored over the letters. Indeed, Harding had bankrolled certain unscrupulous men planning to keep hitting the ranch's assets. Teresa apologized repeatedly, tears slipping from her eyes as she recounted how she tried to dissuade her husband, only to be dismissed. "I'm not strong enough to confront him directly," she confessed, "but I can't watch this anymore." Grayson stood, grim expression, unreadable. Finally, he thanked her with quiet sincerity. "We'll bring this to the sheriff." That night, Teresa stayed in Mrs. Caldwell's small spare room, weeping for the marriage she realized was irrevocably broken. Miriam felt both pity and relief. Pity that Teresa was caught in such a toxic union, relief that they now had tangible proof. The next morning, Grayson ready to trip to Silver Creek, letters in hand, determined to press charges. Miriam insisted on going along. If Harding had truly plotted this entire fiasco, the law must intervene. They left Clara at the ranch under Mrs. Caldwell's watchful care and made a slow journey through snowdrifts. At the sheriff's office, they presented Teresa's documents. Sheriff Ellis, looking over them, let out a low whistle. "Harding's done for if all this holds up in court." He promised to dispatch deputies to find Harding and round up the gang. For the first time in weeks, a glimmer of hope shone on Grayson's face. Back at the ranch, after Teresa left for a friend's place in a neighboring county, life resumed a cautious normalcy, yet everything felt in flux. Miriam saw how the near brush with ruin weighed on Grayson. Late one evening, after Clara was abed, he finally unburdened himself, admitting he feared losing everything he'd poured heart and soul into since his wife died. "Harding's sabotage nearly broke me," he said, voice cracking. "I can't let that happen again. But I can't keep fighting alone." Miriam mustered her resolve, carefully pulling out Albert Montague's letter. Handing it to Grayson, she explained the inheritance. "I'm not certain how it all works legally. I may need to travel to Boston to finalize details, but there's money enough to stabilize the ranch. Perhaps even buy that piano, invest in expansions, defend against railroad claims. There's also an art collection. My grandfather insisted be displayed, bridging refinement and the practical world. Maybe we can do that here. Build a place for music and art in Silver Creek so children like Clara can have real cultural resources." Grayson's eyes widened. "This is tremendous. But it might also pull you away." "For months at least," she nodded. "Yes, I'd have to handle the estate personally. It also demands that I create a permanent exhibition in some recognized location, possibly Boston, but my heart leans toward here if the territory and the local officials would support such a concept." A hush followed. Then he reached out, gently clasping her hands. "Miriam, what do you want? Not just for the ranch, but for yourself." She swallowed, realizing how much she did want. "I want to remain with you, with Clara. I want to see this land and these people embrace the beauty of music and art. But I also want to honor my family's legacy. Maybe we can do both." For a fleeting moment, the tension between them broke, replaced by the nearness of each other's breath. A single lamplit hush wrapped them in possibility. He brushed a thumb across her cheek, voice low. "Whatever you decide, I'll stand by you." Tears pricked her eyes. She'd never felt so understood. Slowly they parted, each still wary of crossing that line from unspoken devotion to open declaration. But the inheritance and Teresa Harding's revelations had abruptly opened a new path, one that might reconcile Miriam's roots with the ranch's future, forging a synergy that no saboteur could destroy. Thus, with winter's cold pressing in and legal battles looming, Miriam Montague prepared for the hardest and most liberating choice of her life. She could not foresee how the months ahead would transform a Silver Creek and solidify her bond with Alexander Grayson. But she knew she would face it like a musician, approaching a grand composition that demanded all her skill and heart. As the snow began its slow retreat under early spring sunlight, word came from the county courthouse. Harding and his accomplices would stand trial for conspiracy and rustling. Teresa Harding's testimony, along with the incriminating letters, proved decisive. The sheriff predicted Harding would likely face imprisonment. Meanwhile, a railroad inquiry found no justification for forcibly seizing Cottonwood Ranch. In a single week, multiple threats on Grayson's livelihood dissolved. Miriam, however, was hardly at peace. She had corresponded with her Uncle Albert and Boston's lawyers, finalizing arrangements to claim her inheritance. The main stumbling block was her grandfather's stipulation that the artwork be publicly displayed and that she personally oversee initial curatorial details. That meant traveling east for at least a few months, possibly more if complications arose. She had not yet told Clara, who would be devastated at losing her teacher. She suspected Grayson knew the separation was inevitable, though they avoided discussing it lest it conjure the heartbreak they dreaded. One morning after Clara finished a reading lesson, Miriam gently explained she would leave soon, but intended to return if possible. The girl's eyes welled with tears. "But you're part of us now. Don't you want to stay?" Miriam's own eyes stung. "I do want to, Clara, but I have a responsibility. The inheritance your father and I talked about, it could help not just the ranch, but the entire region. I must do my part to make that happen." The child's lip trembled. "You promise you'll come back?" Miriam embraced her. "I promise, if at all feasible, we'll find a way to keep in touch. Maybe by telegraph or letters." It felt insufficient. The fear that something might prevent her return gnawed at her. Later that week, the day of departure arrived. Mrs. Caldwell prepared a traveling hamper for Miriam. Grayson harnessed the wagon, quiet but determined. In a poignant farewell scene, Clara clung to Miriam, who whispered encouragement about continuing daily studies, practicing composition, and never losing the spark of creative inquiry. Then, with a final hug, Miriam climbed onto the wagon. Grayson took the reins, guiding them towards Silver Creek to catch the eastbound stage. They spoke little during the ride, each grappling with unspoken emotion. Only once they reached town, as Miriam handed her trunk to the stagecoach driver, did they face each other in the dusty street. Grayson's eyes mirrored the mix of hope and sorrow swirling in her chest. "You'll do great things," he said softly. "We'll keep your room ready. This ranch, my daughter, the lessons you have begun, it'll all be here." Miriam managed a tremulous smile. "Thank you for everything. I'll be back as soon as I can." In a rush of desperation, she pressed a folded letter into his hand, then boarded the stage. Through the window, she watched him open it, reading her carefully chosen words. An avowal of what he meant to her. A vow to return and transform their shared dreams into reality. Then the coach jerked forward, rolling away from the man and child who had changed her life. The journey east was long and surreal. Boston's familiar skyline reawakened memories of her old piano classroom, the refined cobblestone streets, and the subtle disdain she once endured for lacking wealth. Yet now she arrived not as a penniless teacher, but as a woman with an inheritance that included paintings by famous European masters. Uncle Albert greeted her at the station, ambivalent about her choice to waste the collection on a frontier project. But Miriam remained resolute. Grandfather insisted on a public display. Why not a public display in a place that can truly benefit from it? Legal processes absorbed months. She visited attorneys, bankers, and art specialists, making decisions about shipping crates and curation. Meanwhile, she corresponded feverishly with Grayson and Clara, receiving letters that recounted the ranch's daily life. In each note, Clara described her continuing studies. Her excitement about a visiting traveling musician who confirmed the child's talent. Grayson penned shorter, more pragmatic messages, yet each carried an undercurrent of longing, culminating in lines like, "I never realized how essential your presence was until it became an absence." As winter turned to spring in Boston, Miriam orchestrated the logistics: how to move the art west by rail, how to finance a small cultural center in Silver Creek that would house these masterpieces and possibly incorporate local art. Her letters to Grayson proposed grand ideas: a multi-room gallery that might also serve as a music hall, a library. She realized it was far more ambitious than just installing a few paintings. People like Clara and the entire region deserved a true cultural institute, bridging Eastern refinement and Western practicality. Resistance came from certain Boston acquaintances who deemed her plan reckless. "Wyoming is hardly prepared for such art," one family friend scoffed. Another insisted she should remain in Boston, open a gallery that would garner immediate respect among the city's elite. Miriam smiled politely at the naysayers, recalling how folks in Silver Creek had quietly embraced her teaching. Once they saw its worth, She believed they would do the same with fine art and music given the chance. Months passed, the legal formalities concluded, releasing the inheritance fully. The final trunk of paintings was sealed in a special freight car. A wave of excitement mingled with trepidation accompanied Miriam as she prepared to depart Boston again. Uncle Albert, though still somewhat skeptical, offered to accompany her partway, ensuring a portion of the artworks arrived safely. She accepted gratefully. Finally, in late spring, Miriam found herself on a train, west, gazing out at changing landscapes, forests yielding to plains, plains merging into foothills. She penned a letter to Grayson, describing each new milestone. We cross the Mississippi tomorrow. By next week, I should be in Silver Creek. I hope you and Clara are well. My heart leaps to think I might see you soon. She did not mention her fear that he might have grown distant or that rumored railroad expansions might complicate her plans. She clung to the memory of his parted lips as she boarded the stage, the quiet vow in his eyes. When at last she reached Silver Creek, stepping onto the platform, the difference from her previous arrival was palpable. Then she was a naive teacher, quickly dismissed by Harding. Now she was a determined woman returning with crates of art and an unwavering resolve to build a cultural haven. She scanned the station for Grayson or Clara. A swirl of nerves fluttered in her chest. She spotted them near the edge of the platform. Grayson standing tall in his ranch coat, Clara nearly bursting with excitement. Miriam's heart soared. She rushed forward, colliding into a warm embrace. The tension of months apart melted as she inhaled the dusty, sweet scent of the territory, the unmistakable presence of the man she loved, and the child who had become a daughter to her in all but name. Though the station was abuzz with onlookers, she barely noticed. The only real acknowledgement of the crowd came when she saw Mrs. Caldwell in the background, beaming welcome home. Grayson whispered, voice thick. Miriam blinked away tears. Home, she repeated. Yes, she realized it was. Standing on a gentle rise north of Silver Creek, the Montague Grayson Cultural Institute rose in graceful arcs of wood and stone. It was not fully complete, but enough was built to allow the first visitors to sense its promise. 5 years had flashed by since Miriam Montague returned from Boston, art crates in tow. During that time, life in the region had changed drastically. The railroad had established a nearby spur, new homesteaders arrived, and Silver Creek blossomed into a more bustling hub than the dusty settlement Miriam first encountered. Her inheritance had indeed funded this dream, a space to display her grandfather's European collection, along with newly commissioned local art. The building's design allowed for a modest performance hall so children like Clara and many others could experience real pianos, violins, and choral groups. By now, Clara was 20, having studied 2 years at a conservatory in Boston, before returning with fresh ideas about bridging classical structure and the raw stories of frontier life. She served as the Institute's music director, championing both orchestral transcriptions of Cowboy tunes and practicing Chopin nocturnes with equal passion. Miriam, for her part, oversaw curation of the galleries. The Institute's main halls displayed her grandfather's Renaissance paintings, Romantic-era landscapes, and an entire wing devoted to lesser-known American artists. One smaller gallery showcased local creations like the expressive sculptures from Shoshone artisans or the vivid oil canvases capturing the region's rugged beauty. Ranchers and families visited on weekends, some wide-eyed at seeing art. They had only heard about others more fascinated by the building's architecture. Even the harshest skeptics eventually acknowledged the Institute's role in fostering community pride. Alexander Grayson remained at Cottonwood Ranch steadfast in balancing ranch life with the Institute's growth. He spent evenings sketching or planning expansions. Sometimes he designed new additions for the Institute, bridging practicality, like where the freight door should go to handle shipments, with artistic flair. Meanwhile, he championed local acceptance, encouraging ranchers to see that culture wasn't just fancy pictures or city nonsense, but a living inheritance that deepened everyone's sense of place. The rail lines made shipping beef easier, stabilizing the ranch's finances, especially once rustling abated after Harding's imprisonment. The family, yes, they were truly a family now, thrived. On a sparkling late summer day, the Institute held a dedication ceremony for its new West Wing. Flowers draped the entrance. Visitors included government officials, local ranchers, an Eastern newspaper critic, and even Shoshone elders who contributed to an exhibit about their heritage. Clara's ensemble performed original compositions, blending classical motifs with the lilt of frontier melodies, captivating the audience. In the front row, Miriam and Grayson watched with hearts full. Years prior, they had huddled in the ranch house, uncertain if they could even buy a second-hand piano. Now an entire performance space existed, housing a glossy grand piano that echoed beautifully under Clara's deft fingers. After the applause died down, Miriam took the stage addressing the crowd. She spoke of the day I arrived in Silver Creek as a mail-order bride, rejected for being too cultured. I found instead a rancher who believed culture and practicality need not be opposites. Over time, we realized this land deserved more than survival. It deserved the flourishing of minds and hearts. Applause and a few tears rippled through the attendees, she concluded. Today's opening reaffirms that dream to unite Eastern refinement with Western spirit, forging a place where art and frontier grit mingle seamlessly. Grayson joined her expression proud yet humble, telling the crowd how this project was never about overshadowing local traditions, but celebrating them alongside global artistry. That's how we found meaning at Cottonwood in bridging divides. Not breaking them, he said, his arm wrapped around Miriam's waist. Thunderous applause erupted. Next to them, Clara smiled radiantly, her strong features reflecting the confidence instilled by her parents' unwavering guidance. In the months that followed, the Montague Grayson Cultural Institute became a beacon. Schools from as far as Cheyenne arranged field trips. Amateur painters discovered a supportive environment for honing their craft. Music teachers formed a small orchestra, drawing even older ranchers who once laughed at the notion of a fiddle ensemble performing Beethoven. The intangible effect was even more profound. It nurtured a sense of identity for Silver Creek as a place where practicality and cultural richness lived side by side. On one warm autumn evening, Miriam paused in the quiet of an exhibit room, after hours gazing at a painting of a Venetian canal from her grandfather's collection. The painting had once graced a Boston parlor seen only by wealthy elites. Now ranch hands with muddy boots sometimes wandered in to marvel at it. That was the miracle. The frontier had not destroyed culture, but reinterpreted and embraced it. She heard soft footsteps and turned to see Grayson. "I thought you went to the ranch," she said, smiling. He closed the distance between them. "The ranch is fine. I wanted to walk you home." That word carried the fullness of years, bridging Boston parlors and Wyoming meadows. She glanced around, recalling the day they laid the first cornerstone. So many journeys compressed into a single tapestry. "Remember when Harding scorned the idea of you supporting my refined ways," she murmured. Grayson chuckled. "He ended in jail. We ended building an institute." Life has a sense of poetic justice. They stepped outside into the hush of twilight. Lights from the institute glowed behind them. In the distance, the ranch waited, a place of daily chores that had once seemed so alien to Miriam, but now felt as natural as breathing. "I don't regret any step of it," she whispered, her voice catching with emotion. Grayson tightened his arm around her. "Nor do I. Your culture wasn't a liability. It was the missing piece that helped the entire region and see what it could become." They strolled away, the silhouette of the institute receding. A breeze rustled the cottonwoods, reminiscent of that night so long ago when they had recognized their shared vision amid rustling threats and uncertain finances. The land remained as expansive, the sky as wide, but now suffused with a confidence that art and music were not luxuries reserved for cities nor mere frills cast off by practical men. They had proven otherwise, forging a unity of art and labor that carried on daily in Clara's compositions, Grayson's sketches, and the open doors of a cultural center bridging east and west. At the ranch house, Clara was home from rehearsals. She greeted them excited about a new composition she planned to debut. Over supper, the laughter and conversation flowed easily, with Mrs. Caldwell teasing that she'd soon expect a staff of her own to handle the throngs of visitors. Outside, the breeze carried the promise of the upcoming winter. Yet the warmth inside was unwavering. That night, after the lamps were extinguished and the hush settled, Miriam Montague, once rejected for being too cultured, lay awake reflecting on the winding path. Rejection had led her here to a man of unwavering integrity, a daughter whose brilliance thrived under genuine support in a territory that discovered art could harmonize with the grit of everyday ranch living. The hush of night was no longer lonely, but brimming with the echoes of possibility. And in that stillness, she heard once more the quiet refrain of an old hope that love and purpose, once found, can illuminate even the most rugged frontier with an enduring, life-affirming glow. Reflecting on Miriam and Alexander's story, we see how two seemingly opposite worlds, elegant piano recitals and rugged ranch work, melded into a common dream of growth and unity. Through setbacks ranging from greedy land barons to near-bankrupt finances, they discovered that true wealth lies in the harmony of practical skill and cultural depth. Their love did more than silence naysayers. It birthed a legacy where future generations could find hope, learning, and creativity right beside the day's chores. For me, their journey proves that passion and purpose can flourish under any sky if nurtured by faith in each other. What do you think? Did the story's blend of art and frontier living spark ideas on balancing your own dreams? We'd love to hear your perspectives, so drop a comment below. Let's keep celebrating tales that transcend boundaries, blending resilience and beauty into an uplifting, timeless chord.